Well, thank you very much for inviting me to give valedictory address, which I don't think I was competent after having heard Romila Thapar, Ganesh Devi, Prabhat Patnaik, and such stalwarts. But since Megha and Sharad thought that I am competent enough to display my incompetence, I thought, let me take a try. The subject that is chosen is truly extremely relevant, and not only relevant, but also extremely controversial. And that's why I chose to say that we are having a spectre of uncertainty. In fact, I wanted to say we are heading or we are expecting a spectre of evil uncertainty. The reason of this kind of apparently pessimistic view, I would not like to describe the world or the worldview in terms of pessimism and optimism, because almost all the speakers whom I heard were simultaneously pessimist and optimist, including G.N. Devi, or for that matter, including Prabhat Patnaik. The reasons they gave were various. Like Prabhat Patnaik gave a very brilliant exposition on the crisis of capitalism in the neoliberal worldview. Romila Thapar took a historical view, and Ganesh Devi talked about the genocide of languages, which is also going to cause problems. So everybody was partly optimistic and partly pessimistic. That doesn't mean that I have to take any of the specific positions, as Sharad Naure has given a brief review of all the speeches. So forgive me at times if I appear to be neither pessimist or optimist, but cynical. I will not be consciously cynical, but if cynicism provides the realism into that cynicism, then I think we should be ready for realism rather than accuse me of cynicism. I generally would not like to prepare written speeches for such occasions because I'm not a kind of an academic who prepares papers. But this time I decided to write a kind of a paper or the valedictory address. So I'll begin with this preface and partly read out and partly extempore. Well, actually, the simple thing which everybody knows is that the whole world today is passing through an unprecedented turbulence. And such unprecedented turbulence will inevitably touch South Asia. South Asia cannot isolate itself or quarantine itself these days from the world's turbulence. And turbulence is not, let me repeat, caused by pandemic alone. Pandemic actually accentuated the crisis of uncertainty and the crisis of turbulence. So pandemic played it apart. Suppose there was no pandemic, even then we are facing the evil uncertainty. Like if you look back just 2 years, 2019, because 2020 January or 2020 March is when the pandemic was identified and the noise began around on the pandemic issue. But if 2019, 2018, and so on and so forth, if you begin to look back, you'll find that after the election of Donald Trump in 2016, suddenly the world was awakened to the fact that the entire centrist position of the world, or the dominant ideology of left liberalism, or the dominant ideology partly of non-alignment in Indian context, or general simple liberalism, centrist liberalism, which dominated the world almost till 2016, we got to realize in 2016 that the world is not so simple and the world is not so easy to understand under the neoliberal crisis which had begun sometime in 1991 after the collapse of Soviet Union. Now, the question is, India is a very strange kind of a country. In fact, we call ourselves a nation only now recently. Actually, nation is emerging. The idea of India is still an emerging idea. It is not set idea. Like suppose on 14th August 1947, India was one country, British India. But on 15th August, formally, there were two countries. And in 1971, formally, there were three countries. And if the Khalistani movement had succeeded, which appeared to be succeeding for some time, for a few weeks, then India would have been partitioned again and Khalistan would have been born. Forget Khalistan. In the 1960s, Dravidian movement in Tamil Nadu had demanded that let them have a separate currency, separate trade agreement, separate foreign policy, even by remaining within Indian Union. But everybody understood that that was perhaps the beginning of demanding separate Tamil Nadu. Late in the 70s and early 80s, Prabhakaran in Tamil Nadu and Sri Lanka declared, he came to Tamil Nadu and declared, and spoke from Sri Lanka and declared that there is something called Vishal Tamil Nadu, which incorporated the north of Sri Lanka, which was the Tamil region, and Tamil Nadu itself. So there can be a Vishal Tamil Nadu. Just as Khalistanis thought that there can be a Vishal Punjab, Vishal Khalistan, including parts of Pakistani Punjab. I think many of you remember the 1971 war 50 years ago, when there were voices in Bengal as well as in later Bangladesh, East Pakistan then, that there can be a Shonar Bangla, a separate country within the republic. It did not get momentum. That particular idea did not get traction, but it was definitely mentioned. Just as it was mentioned that there can be separate Dravidistan. So Dravidistan, Shonar Bangla, Khalistan, and all of us are familiar with the so-called separatist movement or identitarian movements in Nagaland and Mizoram, and generally Northeast. Arunachal is in crisis for completely different reasons. There are people who say that China has occupied parts of Arunachal. But there are also people, historians, who say that actually Arunachal is under dispute. It is not settled which part of Arunachal or Arunachal itself is part of China or part of India or a disputed territory. So Northeast is in crisis, South was in crisis, North was in crisis. So the only areas, including East was in crisis in West Bengal and Bangladesh, only areas that were not in such kind of a separatist crisis were the landlocked states in India, that is UP, Bihar, Madhya Pradesh, and Rajasthan. They are landlocked. So ultimately, many people thought that that is India. And if you notice, it is that India which is having the Bharatiya Janata Paksha rule, and not only having Bharatiya Janata Paksha majority, but also Hindutva dominant ideology. Now there is a feeling, and there is also commentary all over the country and in the TV debates, that there are only two national parties. One is BJP and another is Congress. All of the parties are relatively smaller or regional. This itself is a misnomer. BJP also is a regional party in the sense that BJP has no base in Tamil Nadu, BJP has no base in Kerala, BJP has virtually no base in Telangana or Andhra, BJP has very, very little base in Bengal, and BJP has extremely small base in the Northeast. So BJP is primarily in the Hindi belt, what is also known as cow belt. So BJP is also a regional party. In that respect, even if Congress Mukta Bharat, so-called Congress Mukta Bharat, Congress continues to be national party because small or big, but Congress does have presence in every single state. It may be small. It can be even insignificant from according to some point of view. But Congress is there. And therefore to say that there are two national parties, Congress and BJP, is not only a misnomer, it is misleading to understand political process. We must recognize the fact that the idea of multi-regional, multicultural, multilinguistic states formation, reorganization of states that came to exist immediately after independence and after reorganization of states was done on partly linguistic basis, partly cultural basis. It had reference to a great extent to Soviet Union, because Soviet Union had so many states, Georgia and Belarusia and Ukraine, and so Azerbaijan, and I don't want to go into that, Armenia, and so many Soviet states, which ultimately turned out to be 15 independent republics. Everybody thought that Union of Soviet Socialist Republics have come to stay. Nobody ever thought in the 60s or in the 40s or in the 70s or even 80s that this Union of Soviet Socialist Republic, named the Soviet Union, which was a superpower, a nuclear superpower, which could challenge the American superpower status, which could create a bipolar world in the Cold War, such Soviet Union with nuclear power could disintegrate into 15 sovereign independent republics. All those republics did not go to war with each other, but to a certain extent they did. Like Chechnya confronted Russia, like Azerbaijan and Armenia fought with each other. Just now we are seeing the world is supposed to be heading towards another catastrophe or Ukraine, when Russia says that Ukraine is part of Russia, that part of Ukraine, and United States is challenging them. So that part which was USSR, Soviet Union, today is in cauldron. And that cauldron has started coming up. That heat has started coming up only after 1991 and primarily after 2001. Why did I say 2001? Because in 2001, we saw the World Trade Center and the Pentagon getting attacked from the Middle East terrorists, or what are known as Islamic terrorists, Arab terrorists. Interestingly, none of those so-called Arab terrorists came from Iraq or Afghanistan. Majority of them came from Saudi Arabia, Morocco, and some other countries, including Egypt. None of them had come from Iraq, or none of them had come from Afghanistan. But taking advantage of that attack on America, the first ever attack after the attack on Pearl Harbor in 1941, first attack after 1941 on Pearl Harbor, this is the attack on American soil. Pearl Harbor was not exactly on the American soil in 1941, but this was straight into the heart of United States of America, and that too, the heart of the capitalism on the World Trade Center in Manhattan, where the global trade takes place, global stock market decides what to do with the wealth that they generate. That was the capital of the neoliberal ideology. That was the Wall Street. And the attack took place on Wall Street in the World Trade Center. So after 2001, first attack on the global peace or global arrangement or the global Cold War divide of the world, binary world, was in 1991 when Soviet Union collapsed and disintegrated into 15 independent republics. The second crisis came in 2001 when another superpower, US, came under attack from so-called Asian African countries of Egypt and Saudi Arabia and so on and so forth. So the world went into turmoil. So there is turbulence ever since going on from 1991. It is not as if there was no such turbulence before. There was. The First World War came out of huge turbulence. Second World War came out of even worse situation when Hitler dominated Germany, not only Germany, but he wanted to create Fortress Europe. And in that Fortress Europe, he wanted to finish all Jews, kill all Jews in the entire European continent. And strangely, we must not forget that Hitler was not only a product of German monopoly capitalism, which he was, but he was subtly supported by the right wing in England and right wing in America. The Lindberghs and the Fords in America had defended Hitler, and some of the right wingers, conservatives in England, had supported Hitler. Why did they support Hitler? Quietly and subtly. Because they thought Hitler being a classical anti-communist, Nazis being anti-communist, Hitler will attack Soviet Union and finish the rising Soviet Union at that point of time. Soviet Union had come into sort of a powerful economy despite world depression when other countries collapsed. Russia, that is Soviet Union at that time, did not collapse in 1929. And that was supposed to be the credit of Joseph Stalin. Whether Joseph Stalin is to be condemned or not is a different question. I don't want to go into that. But Russia emerged, Soviet Union emerged out of the First World War when the revolution took place, 1929 when the Great Depression took place, and the Second World War, which actually defeated Hitler completely and created Soviet Union a most powerful center. The Western powers, the right-wingers, the neoliberals at that time, they were not known as neoliberals then. They did not want this to happen, so they wanted to stop Stalin and Soviet Union and Red Army in tracks, and that's why they were supporting Hitler. But either Red Army strategists or Stalin or Communist Party overturned the table, first by signing a treaty with Germany and second by joining allies to defeat the Nazi forces of Hitler and of course fascist forces of Italy under Mussolini. The victory in Second World War, even the right-wingers in America and England had to concede, was partly because of the leadership of Red Army and also because of Stalin. And that if Red Army was not there, it would have been difficult for allies to defeat the Nazi forces. So strangely, Churchill mentioned in one conversation that strangely the dictatorial Red Army, the dictatorial politics of Red Army and Soviet Union has helped to bring about and sustain the Western democracies. So they always thought that West was a democratic area and the East, that is led by Soviet Union, was a non-democratic, anti-democratic, dictatorial, totalitarian, authoritarian, etc., etc. So actually there was turbulence in the First World War time, which generated energy to create Soviet Union or Russia, Bolshevik Russia. Second World War also turbulence, and together these two wars have killed something like 8 crore people, devastated more than 100 crore people across the country, across the world. And yet that turbulence, according to me, in today's context, has a different dimension and also had a positive outlook. Because Hitler was to be defeated and the red and the not so red or whites came together to defeat the Nazis. Today there is no such thing. Today there is no Red Army. Today there is no socialist ideology. Today there is no left, liberal, democratic, secular, progressive force anywhere in the country dominant. Formerly communist countries like Hungary have a vicious right-wing government. Turkey, which had the great liberal tradition after 1920s, is ruled by another dictatorial authoritarian communal force. Brazil, which was once upon a time seen as an ideal emerging liberal place, today is run by Bolsonaro, who is equivalent to Narendra Modi or a fascist leadership. So whether you are in Latin America, whether you are in Middle East, whether you are in Indian subcontinent, that is South Asia, or Pakistan, you will find, or Afghanistan, everywhere there is a huge turbulence. And that turbulence cannot be unfortunately defined by ideology. What is the ideology of Taliban? What is the ideology of Imran Khan? What is the ideology of Nepal government? What is the ideology of Sri Lankan government? Whichever Sri Lankan government tried to isolate, undermine the Tamilian culture, Tamilian language, and Tamilian people. Small. The whole of Sri Lanka is only 2 crore people. Whole of Sri Lanka, including Tamil Nadu, is only 2 crore people. You know what it means to be 2 crore people? 2 crore people is the population of Mumbai region. Whole of Mumbai, MMRDA. Mumbai metropolitan region's population is 2 crores. So Sri Lanka is equal to whole of metropolitan region of Mumbai, including Mumbai city. That is a 2 crore people. In that 2 crore population, there is a civil war. There was a severe civil war going on between Tamilians and Sinhalese. thousands of people were killed. At one point, Indian peacekeeping forces were also involved. So small country like Sri Lanka on the south of India could face civil war of that magnitude and that intensity shows that in South Asia, there are hundreds of such political landmines which can disrupt the integrity, unity, if at all there is unity of South Asia. And those landmines are so powerful that they do not relate themselves to their own country. Like Sri Lankan crisis can snowball into Tamil Nadu. Bangladesh crisis has often snowballed in West Bengal. The Punjab crisis in our Punjab has resulted in crisis in Punjab, Pakistan. For instance, many of you know, and in case you don't know or don't believe in conspiracy theories, the fact is that under Ziaul Haq, the military ruler of Pakistan, he was directly helping the Khalistani forces, and it was almost planned to the T that Khalistan Republic will be declared from the Amritsar Golden Temple with support of the religious population in Punjab among Sikhs, supported by international Sikh organizations in Canada, US, and UK. All plans were ready to declare Republic of Khalistan. In fact, in New York Times, there was an advertisement called Republic of Khalistan. We welcome Republic of Khalistan. So the forces of disintegration of India were already working with the help of Pakistan. Pakistan wanted to take revenge of division of Pakistan, and their belief is that it is India which created Bangladesh by splitting Pakistan. So it is Pakistan's revenge to split India and create Khalistan. The movement to create Khalistan still goes on, but it is weak. If Indira Gandhi had not acted quickly and decisively to defeat the Khalistani forces, the Khalistani terrorist forces, by even sacrificing her own life, perhaps in 1983-84, we would have seen the partition of India, second partition of India, and the birth of Khalistan. But Mrs. Gandhi took the risk. She knew what was coming to her own life by taking that decision. In fact, she said just one day before she was killed that I know I will have to pay with my blood for this decision. And that happened, unfortunately. The point is, these are the feelings and these are the events, these are the episodes which have taken place in just last 75 years. We are celebrating 75th year of India's integrity and unity. If I have to assess the situation of today and visualize and extrapolate that situation for, let us say, 2047, which will be centenary of India's independence, or 2050, which will be centenary of India's republic, it will not be easy for me to say that the same geographic Indian identity will be there in 2047 or 2050. I wish it is there. It is our duty of those who are listening to the speech or those who are working today in politics or in social movements. It depends on us what we think today, what we do today, as to what will happen in 2047 and 2050. Otherwise, the same fate that happened to Soviet Union could happen to India. We may remain complacent about the integrity and unity of India, like Soviet Union did, and just within 1 year, I happened to be there in Soviet Union at that time when the Soviet Union got disintegrated. I remember distinctly when here in the rest of the world, George Bush Sr. had begun his attack on Iraq to liberate Kuwait in 1991. At that very time, the newspapers could not give real headlines. The real headlines on the eastern side was Lithuania had begun to send its independent forces against Soviet Union, against Russia. And Russian tanks had entered Lithuania. So Russian tanks had entered Lithuania when American tanks were entering Iraq, or American planes were bombing Iraq. So actually the Cold War binary world had begun to collapse almost in the same year and same month. It is on 17 January 1991 when George Bush Sr. decided to attack Iraq. And it was the second week of January in Lithuania when Lithuanian liberating forces said we want to liberate from Russia or from Soviet Union. So the binary was collapsing. Soon after that, within 1 year after that, after the Soviet Union collapsed on 25th December 1991, formally, next year, the Yugoslavian Republic came into crisis. Yugoslavia was originally a place which had united and brought together several Balkan states like Serbia, Bosnia, Montenegro, Slovenia. All of them had come together, Croatia, and had formed Yugoslavia. Yugoslavia, the socialist integrated Yugoslavia, was born after the Second World War, but its united forces were operating from 1920 when Yugoslavia term came into existence. Yugoslavia survived and grew, and actually Joseph Tito was colleague of Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru together while forming non-alignment movement. So Yugoslavia was a powerful force. That Yugoslavia started disintegrating in 1992, and the process was complete in 1997 when 6 states emerged out of Yugoslavia. And what was Yugoslavia's population? United Yugoslavia's population was a little over 3 crores. Little over 3 crores, which is almost 1/4 of Maharashtra's population. If we want to superficially, and which may appear ridiculously you can say, or superficially, compare, say, Maharashtra with Yugoslavia, it is like Vidarbha going against Marathwada, Marathwada going against Konkan, Konkan going against Western Maharashtra. But they had actual armies and they were bombing each other. Bosnia and Serbia were killing each other. Croatia was killing Bosnians and Serbia was killing Bosnians. Bosnians were Muslims. So the 6 states out of Yugoslavia declared republic, their independent sovereign republic. Nobody had thought, even after collapse of Soviet Union, that within 1 year, the process of disintegration of Yugoslavia would begin. By 1998, there was no Yugoslavia. So the century ended, 20th century ended by dismantling whatever it had created as united project. Soviet Union was a united project, Yugoslavia was a united project, Indian Union was a united project, and you may recall that it was in 1991 to 1996, European Union came together. Just when Soviet Union was disintegrating, Yugoslavia was disintegrating, European Union was coming together to mobilize all the neoliberal capitalists in one bloc of European Union. But that also became an illusion shortly. We have seen in last decade how the European Union is suffering. There are countries like Greece and even Scotland and UK. UK also wants to get out of it. UK never anyway subscribed to Europe. But Scotland now wants to break away from UK. Whether it happens or not is immaterial. But the point is, in Scotland, the identitarian politics is taking shape. So the whole world, which looked rather simple and globalized world in year 2000 began to disintegrate in the 21st century. And now we are in that 21st century when the turbulence is actually enhanced and magnified and horrified by the arrival of new technology. There were no mobile phones in 1991 when Soviet Union disintegrated. No mobile phones when Yugoslavia disintegrated. In fact, no mobile phones when European Union came together. No mobile phone when Iraq was attacked by US. After 1995-96, we saw this new technology of mobile phones, which was further helped currently by artificial intelligence and a whole satellite network to support them, creating completely different kinds of capitalist monopolies like Facebook and others, Google. Now, without Google, we cannot think of our existence, either in the information society or in political society. By the way, Google did not exist in 1996. That is 25 years ago, there was no Google. Nobody heard of Google, nobody knew about the company called Google. And that company in the last 25 years has taken over our entire lives. Today, the trade is handled by them and traffic is also handled by them. So Google is going to decide the future network of nations and the peoples. And Google is a different capitalist ballgame than the earlier capitalists who operated in market. It is not even market economy. It is something beyond market economy, but having the market principle in command. It is capitalism. It is neoliberal capitalism, but it is a neoliberal capitalism driven by technology and those technologies which are governing your and my mind. And that mind is actually helping to disintegrate the world. It was impossible without the help of the WhatsApp University, without the help of the Facebook and the Google, to have such kind of fanaticism and frenzy of Hinduism. It was impossible. Similarly, even in small countries like Myanmar, the hatred and the violence against Rohingya Muslims would not have been so easily possible in the binary Cold War world. That has all happened after the arrival of mobile phone and mainly after the arrival of Google. That doesn't mean Google is responsible for it. What is happening is mindless technology without ideology. So technology is replacing ideology. And if technology replaces ideology and profit replaces surplus, then in that situation, whichever company, software company or otherwise, Silicon Valley or otherwise, whichever company is able to deliver more simple gadgets to you will make more money, and so they are interested in money as well as spread of technology. So on the one hand, the technology is doing a good job of connecting the world. We thought technology is creating a borderless world. Many of you might remember in 1989 to 1991, there was this notion of end of history. Earlier, before that, 30 years before that, there was the notion of end of ideology. In 1991, the idea of end of history was dominant. But actually what we are seeing is recreation of history and recreation of history of conflict. And that conflict is not generated by idea of nationalism. That new idea of new history is being generated in the name of religion, in the name of faith. Not only here, some of you may have read or heard about the New York Times report saying that Trump was essentially helped by the neo-radical fundamentalist Christian movement. Similarly, in Iran, we are seeing a neo-fundamentalism of Khomeini or Khomeini type under Khomeini and others, which was different in 1979 when the Iranian Revolution took place. It is more intensified version. In Saudi Arabia, in Iran, in America, and in India, and in Myanmar, and in Pakistan, and in Bangladesh, and in Sri Lanka, we are finding people and ideologies which have nothing to do with any idealism or any ideas at all. They are driven by completely different forces, completely anarchic forces. I could have understood even if Sri Lankan nationalism versus Tamil nationalism. It is no more that. It is Sri Lankan versus Tamilian fundamentalism. It is not nationalism of the kind which could have perhaps given a different dimension. Similarly, the Hindu Rashtra idea today under Narendra Modi is not the same Hindu Rashtra idea that Vajpayee practiced. Vajpayee also belonged to the same RSS school, but he did not project himself as the representative of Hindu Rashtra, which Amit Shah and Modi are doing. How can even during Vajpayee's time, it would have been perhaps difficult for Dharma Samsad to say in Hyderabad openly that what we are looking for is a massacre of Muslims, eliminate Muslims completely. Golwalkar had said way back in 1930s that Hitler is right in eliminating all Jews. We should think of similar plans even in India. At that time, he had, of course, Muslims and also Christians in mind. But that idea did not really get traction in India. Golwalkar's party could not win any election after 1952 when Jansangh was formed by RSS. Jansangh did not get even 67 seats, which was the maximum they got in 1967. Beyond that, they could not go till almost Babri Masjid was destroyed. It is after Babri Masjid was destroyed that BJP began to get traction. Till that time, they were a force, a right-wing force, a communal force, a fundamentalist force, but they did not have the social sanction. Interestingly, it is the middle class, the educated middle class, who is a beneficiary of Nehruvian economy, beneficiary of public sector banks, beneficiary of public sector in general, beneficiary of so many independent, organized, productive organizations from Durgapur, Bhilai, and other places like HOC and HMT. They created the middle class. There was just about 1% of the middle class at the time of independence. Today they are 40%. Most of them are educated. A large number of them have migrated to states and Silicon Valley and dictate Hinduism from America to Indians. And the Indian middle class, which is resident non-Indian, they are non-resident Indians. So non-resident Indians is calling shots to the resident non-Indians that you also practice the Hindutva ideology here. So we have this new arrival of new Hinduism, which was not so powerful even during Vajpayee's time, though Vajpayee belonged to the same school of thought. Vajpayee did not give a call for Congress Mukta Rashtra. Vajpayee did not give a call to completely demolish Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru and his ideology and his family. That doesn't mean Vajpayee was a saint. That doesn't mean that Vajpayee did not believe in the idea of Hindutva. But his Hindutva did not degenerate into the kind of Hindutva that we are witnessing today under Narendra Modi and Shah, who are giving a new call and a new sanctity and new legitimacy to the fanatic notion of Hindutva. Where it will take us, you can't say. I will not be surprised. I don't want to predict. We are in 2022 and next elections are due in 2024. I will not be surprised. I will not be shocked if there is some kind of renewed violence in next 2 years. They are attempting that very much, and Haridwar Dharma Samsad was because of that, to aim at that. Even day before yesterday, Amit Shah, what he gave a speech in Muzaffarnagar, clearly showed that his aim is to create Hindu-Muslim divide, not divide. Hindu-Muslim divide has been practiced even earlier. But this Hindu-Muslim divide is to create riots, to create ruckus, to create massacres. And on the wave of that massacre, on the wave of that fundamentalism, get elected again in 2024. If in 2024, with these forces in command, in political command, if Modi and Shah and their ideology, so-called ideology of Hindu Rashtra, come to power, we are heading for a greater crisis between 2024 and 2029. I would not be surprised if the violence starts stalking at your home, stalking in your colleges, and stalking in all the institutions. Already, most of the institutions which are created by independence movement, from Reserve Bank of India, though it was born in 1935, Reserve Bank of India had autonomous status. CBI was autonomous. Election Commission was autonomous. They are the products after freedom. All those are undermined. NIA was a creation during UPA government, but NIA has been taken over. So every single autonomous liberal organization has been undermined by Modi and Shah, and they are ruling it, and they are dictating terms, and they are following it, and they are following it on whose behalf? The middle class. It is educated middle class in urban and rural centers, educated middle class among the BCs and OBCs, educated middle class in Adivasis, educated middle class in any part, any caste, any religion, is supporting the fundamentalist idea today. Nobody would have thought that the qualified surgeons and the qualified engineers and qualified doctors and qualified space engineers, talking in terms of Hinduism and Hindutva, which they had never talked, they would not have got education if Pandit Nehru had not started the scientific temper, idea of scientific temper. And with the idea of scientific temper, the institutions like IITs and the physical laboratories and the chemical laboratories and the new world. That world, that new world turned out to be sarcastically brave new world, the way it got handed over to these fascist forces. Our task is to defeat these forces. And then only perhaps we can overcome this turbulence. I am not saying that this turbulence will definitely lead necessarily to disintegration of India or fascists taking over, but that possibility is there, and therefore we have to be extremely alert to see that they don't take over. How do we do that? We have to understand the destructive nature and tone of technology, particularly on the educated middle class. And unless the educated middle class turns its back on this ideology, I don't think it is possible. Once upon a time, even I believed that it is the working class which needs to be in vanguard to make a change. It is not just enough to understand the world, but to change the world. Today, time has come when we have to first understand the world before trying to change the world. Because understanding itself is creating a problem. While understanding itself, there are people who are soft on Hindutva and still call themselves liberal. Then there are people who are completely anti-Hindutva without looking into the nature of reality and directly confronting the middle class. Because they want the support of the middle class, they are ready to succumb and connive at that middle class lifestyle. Today, that kind of consumerism, that kind of hedonism has come to be a real situation. All the shopping malls, all the big malls and Inox theaters, they are not just entertainment and they are not just trade. They are the centers of new ideology. Pandit Nehru had thought that Bhakranangal, Durgapur and Bhilai were the new temples of modernity and scientific temple. Today's such new temples of fundamentalism, anarchy, hedonism, and indifference and insensitive society are the shopping malls and Inox and overall consumerism promoted by corporates. These corporates get their energy from international agencies of Mossad in Israel, which we are seeing in the form of Pegasus, and also CIA in America, and some European intelligence agencies which are working for this corporate capitalism. So we have a larger global fight. Once Amartya Sen said, yes, I believe in globalization because the globalization will initiate the fight against the right-wing globalization by the left liberal globalization. So our task is to mobilize the left liberal centrist secular progressive forces globally to fight the globalization of the right and the neoliberals. Prabhat Patnaik gave a very clear warning. I will repeat that warning and I will merely say that we are heading for a very difficult period, and let this seminar make us serious about the challenge and about the threat that the evil uncertainty is having its spectre on us. It is haunting us. The spectre of evil uncertainty is haunting us. We shall overcome provided we stay together with ideology, because ideology finally can defeat the mindless technology. But we must have ideology today. Today, nobody is discussing ideology. Let us create ideological platform without converting ideology into some kind of sectarianism. Ideologies have often led to kind of ideological sectarianism. Our task is to build ideology without being sectarian and without being partisan only to certain sections, but take along all people who are ready to be liberal, not necessarily who are in agreement on every issue with us, but unite the people and we shall overcome. Thank you very much.